Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the managing director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. I've actually had a lot of correspondence. Folks have been sending me emails and messages, comments in various videos regarding this whole notion of a Teflon Thai baht or something. I think maybe Tim Newton did a video on it. People have sent me links. If he did, tip of the hat to him. I don't know what he actually said. I haven't watched that video. But it seems to be the premise is, and this is something, even I have my own issues with a strong Thai baht, but I'm not getting into the whole issue of whether it's good or bad if the baht is strong compared to the dollar or other currencies abroad. The issue here is, and what I want to dive into is what the thumbnail pertains to. The thumbnail is actually taken from one of my all-time favorite movies. I love the movie Schindler's List. I know that sounds strange in a sense because it's a very tragic film, but it's a film that, to my mind, really speaks to the resilience and the endurance of the human spirit. And it's interesting because it shows how, in a sense, even a scoundrel can be sort of redeemed just by his own basic humanity. You know, Schindler, and I've actually read 2 biographies on Oskar Schindler ever since I saw that movie. And I find him to be he's a very fascinating character. One, he was actually a member of German intelligence. He was a member of the Abwehr. He's a very controversial figure in the Czech Republic, or what was once called Czechoslovakia, pertaining to the issues surrounding the Sudetenland. But ultimately, and he was a sort of, if you will, early member of the National Socialist movement in Germany, which is ironic or paradoxical, however you want to look at it, when you look at his later history where, I just think the man's basic humanity came through and he just couldn't be party to a massacre, and he just basically took it upon himself to help people. That's basically what he did, especially people that were close to him that he knew that were, personal. There's another figure from that era, Sir Nicholas Winton, you can read about, who assisted in getting thousands of children to safety in the lead up to the Second World War. There's stories like this. They're just kind of heartwarming where, what is it, the Shakespearean quote, "So shines a good deed in a weary world." In any event, there's a scene in that movie which is actually apocryphal. The scene did not occur, or the circumstances where he's seeking this loan to buy this factory actually did not occur. The factory was effectively appropriated and given to him if you read his biographies. But that said, it's a scene where he's talking to these 2 guys who are in the ghetto, these 2 Jewish folks, and they're talking to him, and he's trying to get them to loan money to basically buy their factory, and then he's going to pay them back with pots and pans that he produces that they can then use to trade while they're in the ghetto. That's basically the premise of it. And there's a scene where one of them says, "Hey, that deal's not good enough. A fair deal would be a percentage of the company." And he says, "That's not possible under the current circumstances we're in." Basically, they're not allowed to own anything at that point legally, if you read the history about it. And then the one guy says to him, he says, "Money's still money." And Schindler turns to him and he says, "No, it is not. That's why we're here." This is an important thing to understand. And again, I'm not going to the whole issue. This doesn't get to the underlying issues associated with the tragedies that occurred in World War II. I'm not going to that. What I'm trying to explain here is it's what Schindler says there. There are points in history where the very paradigm of money, or of what is money or what holds value, changes. Now, certain things, there's been through lines throughout history. There's a great guy to really watch if you're interested in some of this, a gentleman by the name of Alistair MacLeod. I'll try to find his Substack link and put it up in the description below. He used to work for Gold Money. He's on YouTube. He's all over YouTube. He talks about this stuff. But he often talks about how people have a very fundamental misunderstanding of the so-called rising price of gold, because he says gold is not rising. It's the value of fiat money that's falling. Or I think it would be better put, the perceived value of fiat money versus gold that is falling in people's estimation. rounding this back, and this is the whole point of money still money. No, it is not. That's why we're here. A perfect example of this was a major occurrence that I've recently talked about, especially in connection with the talk of these account seizures and so-called mule accounts, et cetera, et cetera. There was a temporary situation that occurred under Nixon, where Nixon temporarily closed the gold window. I believe 1971, he temporarily closed the gold window. It's never opened since. Up to that point, under that, what I would call Bretton Woods 1.0, basically the world's, or the Western world's economies were, all fiat currencies were sort of pegged to the dollar, and then the dollar was pegged to gold. And then at one point, France sent in a couple of battleships to New York Harbor and said, hey, we're here to collect our gold. We want to change in dollars and we want to take gold. In the close aftermath of that, Nixon temporarily closed the gold window. In that moment, what we had known of as money was not still money in the same sense it had been the day before. That's one of these moments, one of these almost epochs, if you will, where things fundamentally change. And that's what Schindler is trying to convey in that scene, in my opinion, even though it's apocryphal, that, hey, we're under circumstances where the very paradigm of what is money and the value thereof, maybe the value thereof may be the better salient point, the crux of it, but has changed. And in 71, dollars, at least on a central bank level, ceased to be redeemable directly for gold. From that point forward, we went into what I would kind of call Bretton Woods 2, where, effectively, and by the way, for all of those out there who are big haters of Henry Kissinger, and I know Henry Kissinger has a real mixed bag of accomplishments, or so-called accomplishments, but what we would call the petrodollar system, yeah, that was a big accomplishment. If anything, Kissinger should probably be lauded by Americans for the 50 years after 71, because the petrodollar system basically existed, whereby Saudi Arabia basically bought US treasuries. They would only sell oil in dollars. So effectively the dollar kind of got tied to oil in place of the whole Bretton Woods 1.0 system. For better or worse, and I'm not saying I necessarily like this development. I want to be clear on this. I am, at the end of the day, I was born and raised in America. I have come to love my adopted homeland here in Thailand, but I am, at the end of the day, an American, by birth, if nothing else. And I'm Western too. I'm Western thinking. I'm sort of Western oriented in the way that I approach life, I guess, philosophically. I don't like necessarily seeing, I've done a video in the past talking about the Yuasa shift, where sort of we've watched the epicenters of technical innovation move west, if you will, over the centuries. And in my opinion, we're currently in the midst of, I don't think we can say it's fully concluded, but we're watching that jump over here to East Asia. Now, I would argue it's not going to one place. It's sort of going to be diffuse throughout East Asia, but that's what we're seeing. It's sort of, I viewed Silicon Valley Bank's collapse as a watershed moment where we saw the Yuasa shift and things started moving over here. The point I'm trying to make is I don't necessarily like these developments. I'm not making these videos because I like it. I'm just trying to point it out, and especially for expats, try to give them a framework in which to sort of deal with all of this stuff, in their day-to-day lives, for lack of a better word. And for those who are interested in long-form content that I make on a weekly basis, where I do dive into this stuff, even much more deeper than even a video like this, quite frankly, under certain circumstances, especially as it pertains to local, regional, and even international geopolitics. I get into it on our long-form news service, Integrity News Service. You can email us, media@integrity-legal.com. We can give you the information about how to get on the mailing list for that. Also, while I'm talking my book, I'll put some photos up. We've got my better half and I set up a restaurant here in downtown Bangkok. If you're interested in American diner-style food, breakfast anytime, it's called Pancake Palace, as the name implies, breakfast anytime, as well as American diner-style food, cheeseburgers, hamburgers, buffalo wings, chili bowls. You can check us out there. There's links in the description below to find our location. We'd love to see you there. Back to this, though, the point I'm trying to make is I don't like necessarily the rise of BRICS, if you will. I don't like necessarily the developments that I'm seeing where, there may be, for lack of a better term, I mean, it's just factually correct, something of a decline in usage of the dollar in international trade. I'm not necessarily in favor of any of this, but at the end of the day, it is happening to some degree. Now, I'm also not Chicken Little. I do not think the sky is falling. I do not think anyone, including any of the jurisdictions in the so-called BRICS countries, want to see a so-called dollar collapse. That's not my point. But I do think that as the geopolitical situation changes, as the economies of Eurasia especially begin to rise and the dynamic of world trade networks begins to shift, we're entering one of these moments not unlike the scene that I've thumbnailed from the movie Schindler's List where, money's still money. Well, no, it is not. And in a way, the rise of crypto is somewhat indicative of this. Something that we want, I remember the first time I heard of the notion of cryptocurrency, I kind of laughed about it because I never thought people would actually, believe that value could be stored that way. Now, if you want to get into all the theories and philosophies behind crypto, I don't have time for that. I have my own thoughts on it. I see the benefits of it, but I don't think it's the savior other people think it is. Long story short, and to sort of conclude this video, I think we're entering a very different period than anything we've seen in roughly the last 75 years. Well, maybe longer than that now. But basically since the end of the Second World War, the creation of what I would call Bretton Woods 1.0, and then Bretton Woods 2.0 that we saw basically up to this point, things are shifting. Do I think it's cataclysmic for Western fiat currency holders, dollar, pound, euro, otherwise? No, not necessarily. But things are changing. And the paradigm out here in East Asia, especially regarding those currencies, I think it's probably going to shift. So don't be surprised if it does. And exactly how and the permutations of that shift remain to be seen. But we'll certainly be keeping you updated on this channel as the situation evolves.